Hello and welcome to Evaluate This. I'm Andrew Fryer, and in this short screencast I want to show you Hyper-V Server 2012. It's a free download, it's a free operating system, and it's specifically designed to run lots and lots of virtual machines where Windows Server itself isn't the operating system inside those virtual machines. A good example of this is VDI, because then you'd be running Windows 7 or Windows 8. Another use case might be because you've got lots of Linux VMs, Red Hat, SUSE, CentOS and so on, which run just fine in Hyper-V. So Hyper-V Server is essentially a cut down version of Windows Server. And just how cut down is it? Well, let's have a look. Here's one I prepared earlier. And yes, the screen is totally black except for my mouse whizzing around on the screen. If I hit Ctrl-Alt-Delete and start the Task Manager, then I can start to run some new processes. Run a new task, for example, CMD. So I've now got a command prompt. Fantastic. And I can run Task Manager. I can run Notepad. New for Hyper-V Server in its 2012 edition is PowerShell. I've got a very lightweight shell that I can also use to configure the box. And in fact, when I first installed the Hyper-V Server onto this physical laptop, I joined it to my domain. And then because my domain has got group policy enabled to a now remote desktop, I'm able to remote desktop into it, which is what I'm doing here. And what joining a domain also gives me is the ability to manage it from here. So it just shows up in Server Manager as another server, from which I can do things like configure NIC teaming. And that's an important point as well, because some NIC teaming software didn't run too well on Server Core, and so it was difficult to use. We've got NIC teaming inside the operating system, and we can use it there. However, there's a lot of things that you can't do. If I jump back onto my machine and bring up my command prompt, wherever it's gone, and do get Windows feature, these are the only features that I can install on this particular operating system. It's a much shorter list. For example, there's no IIS in here. The .NET framework's in here because we need that for PowerShell. However, I can use a number of Hyper-V servers to create a cluster, and I can do failover clustering. So you're not limited with what you can do here with your virtual machines. You can still create highly available virtual machines. But it's a pretty limiting list otherwise. So what you want to do after installing this is probably to remote manage it. Now you've already seen it in Server Manager here, but if I went on to Hyper-V Server, then I can manage it from here as well. And then I can go in and do all the things that I'd want to do in Hyper-V, like set up a new switch. And I want an external switch. And I'm going to call it CorpNet. We'll see why in a minute. And it's bound to the network drive I have on that particular machine. And because I've changed the network connectivity, it just drops out there for a few seconds. The other thing I want to do in Hyper-V Server is to configure the Hyper-V settings, where my virtual machines are going to live. Notice I'm remote browsing here. I've also got the opportunity to set up live migration. Hyper-V doesn't limit you to anything that you can't do in the full server as far as Hyper-V itself is concerned. So yes, I want live migrations to work here. I'm going to use Kerberos from any available network. And I'm going to do the same for replication if I want to. And I've got separate videos in this series about how to do all of this. So I'm just going to whiz through it here. I'll just get a warning about the firewall. And I've now configured this server just like any other server. And what I could do now is take a virtual machine, say this DA client and now move that onto my new Hyper-V server. I can choose where it's going to go. And that's going to take a few seconds to run. And it just shows you that Hyper-V Server can just be integrated into the rest of your environment just like any other server. So it's just essentially Windows Server without the licensing rights to virtualize. And that's why it's free, because we don't charge for Hyper-V. So if this looks interesting, you might want to try and download this yourselves. You just need to go to the link that I had at the start of my video here and get yourself a copy. I've been Andrew Fryer. Thank you very much for listening.